We got to share one.
Morning, everyone.
What?
I'm not gonna cramp your style.
Last time we just got on one side.
Welcome to the workshop or visitor review.
Somebody got to go up.
We're glad that you're here. I know some of you travel a long distance, probably have to get up real early, but I doubt if you got up any earlier than I did. I had to do my hair. Anyway, this workshop is hosted by the College of Education Office of Research. And the people that we have working in the Office of Research are 3 faculty members and 2 and quarter graduate students. Okay? Graduate students do APA checks and the professors do all kinds of things. I'm pretty sure a lot of you know Dr. Katie Benson. You know what her expertise is.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Statistics. She got the load off our back. Tracy's and mine. We know a little bit, but nothing like this lady. And I'm telling you, if you don't already know, you better start crying now. You know, some of you know, she's not going to be with us after summer.
Right.
Oh, yes, what I say. Well, I'm already crying now. I'm already done mine. And then the other 2 is Dr. Tracy Henley. He's a faculty member in psychology, counseling, and special ed department. And so he's very helpful in reviewing dissertation and so forth. I'm Maximino Plata. I'm the director of the office. They called me out of retirement. This is the second go around. I love it. Don't be sorry for me. I like what I'm doing. I love what I'm doing. And then I have had a good fortune of developing good collegiality and friendship with these 2 fine people. I don't know whether all of you know where the bathrooms are. It's straight down the hall on the left. It's pretty far down on the left. Women's first and men's is a little bit later on. We do have a break room. Let's see how many floors we have here. 2 down on the left. And there's coffee. And coffee. Let's see, and there's also some sweet drinks. I don't know what you call them, but they're good. And also some little boxes of fruit juice and crunch and things like that. And different kinds of sugar, regular sugar, and no, the other one is whatever you call it. Anyway, sweet and low, yeah. So it's available down there. And so here's the way this is going to play out. About 9:10, and this is about right, Dr. Katie will be the first presenter, and then after that will be Dr. Tracy Henley, and we'll take a break. Is that right? Yes, we'll take a break around 10:30. Because, listen, you will get so much information that your head is going to say, "Whoa, give me a break, give me a break." No, you know what I'm talking about. It just messes with you. So, the other person I want to just say something about, the gentleman back there running the machine, this is being videotaped, so that it is made available to you later on if you, what did I say? You know, what they said? Go back and look at that. And, all of you have handouts, right? Did everybody get their handouts? You didn't. What didn't you? That's weird. Sorry we missed you.
Anybody else?
No, not yet, Dr. Brown. Well, here's what I said. Not even to be disrespectful. He's our friends. there could be some late shows, and I've got enough for the students, but we want the students to get theirs first. I can always give my colleagues the handouts at the university. That's it. So, but if you have leftovers, we'll get you one.
Gotcha.
Okay. All right. I will be quiet. Katie, go, and she will take over. Dr. Katie.
Okay. Okay, I'm pushing this, but the green light's not coming on.
Hold it down.
Got it. Let me finish getting dressed.
It's all good.
Okay. I'm going to start out talking about choosing a topic, because that's not really part of the lit review, but it has a relationship. So let's talk about that just briefly. I've had several students, actually I got this idea from Dr. Henley, but I've tried it with a couple of students and it's been so helpful. So I thought that I would share it with you because it is kind of part of the lit review process. If you want to look at this handout that has the colors on it, it's the only one with colors. You know, a lot of times students come and they say, I'm just going to use the example of this particular young lady. I don't think she's here. Zenobia, you're not here, are you? Okay. I did get her permission to use this though, so she said I could talk about it. She said, I want to do something about PLCs, professional learning communities. And I said, okay, well, what do you want to do? And she started talking about it, and I said, you know, I think we already know the answer to that question. And she said something else, and I said, I think we already know the answer to that too. And she said, well, what am I going to do then? And, well, here's a suggestion. So it's a good way to start your lit review. Look at some dissertations or some journal articles, either one. As you know, chapter 5 in your dissertation, you've got to give some ideas for future research, right? So that's a good place to look for ideas. The chapter 5, you don't have to read the whole dissertation if you don't want to, but if it looks like a topic that might be interesting to you, look to their chapter 5 and see what their ideas were for future research. You can also do that with journal articles. At the end of the article, the authors usually talk about something else that needs to be done to extend what they did. So here, you can see what she did here. She listed the author. These were just dissertations. She put the dissertation and the date because I told her it needs to be current. If you're looking at a dissertation that was published in 2008, well, that was 7 years ago, so that research may now be done. So if you're looking for a topic, then you're going to want to choose to look at some literature that's current because you don't want it to have already been done. So she went through and she listed the ideas for recommendations for future research, and then she went through and color coded them. So on the back side, you can see what her codes were. Then she and I sat down and discussed this to see where would be some good places for her to go. She didn't want to do a qualitative study, so several of the qualitative studies that she looked at had said quantitative would be interesting to do. She said, okay, so we're going to look at quantitative. There were some things that just because I have experience not necessarily with PLCs, but just with dissertation topics, I said, nah, let's not do that, or that'll be too hard, or you know, mixed methods are very difficult, and we try and steer people away from those as much as possible. So anyway, we were able to narrow it down to some things that she could really get a grasp. So it's a way for you to start if you just have an idea, but not a specific idea for your topic. Then it's a way to get started. I asked a student to do it yesterday, and she said, oh, that's such a great idea. That gives me a way to focus, you know, rather than just be like, I don't know what to do. So anyway, that's a thought for you about choosing the topic. Okay, now I want to talk about the purpose of the lit review. So the main purpose is for you to become an expert. For you to become an expert in the topic that you've chosen. The other big purpose is you want to be sure that you're not doing something that's already been done. you'd be surprised at how many, a lot of our students in ed leadership and in curriculum instruction want to look at something that is personal to them, something that's at their school, a program that they're using, a program that they developed maybe, and that's fine to do that. We have to be careful for it not to be so narrow that it's only interesting to your school or your district. It needs to be applicable or interesting to a larger body of people out there. Otherwise, you're just doing a program evaluation. And Dr. Zellhart in the grad school is not very interested in us doing very specific program evaluations. So we have to be sure that it's applicable to a wide audience. So the main purpose is for you to become the expert. There's a handout called Purpose of the Lit Review, and I'm not going to read this to you, but I do want to talk about the identified purposes here. I found some interesting articles when I was doing a little lit review about how to do a lit review. So this one article by Hofstede identified 5 purposes for a lit review. So to establish your credentials, that's the first one. To show that you know about your topic, that you're not just, thinking of your own opinions and your own ideas, because, unfortunately, in a dissertation, no one cares about what you think until chapter 5. So chapter 1, where you've got all that interesting background information, chapter 2, even chapter 2, nobody cares what you think. It's not a place for you to offer your opinion. Now, you're sort of getting your opinion in there because you're doing the choosing of what literature to review. But you don't want to, you can't bias it. So you're going to establish your credentials as a researcher. Another thing that you're doing is establishing the theory base for what you want to do, the theoretical framework. Quite a few of your professors may require that you have a section on the theoretical framework. Other professors are not as interested in that being a specific section, but embedded within. So when you meet with your advisor, he or she will be able to talk to you about that, how they want the theoretical framework behind your study, how they want that to be addressed. The context lets the reader see how your work is going to fit into the broader scheme of the field that you're looking at. So it's important to figure out where your study that you want to do fits into what's already been done, how you're going to add to the body of knowledge. Our graduate school has a list of things that make a dissertation a suitable topic. And it's a lot of those are based on how your research fits into that topic, to the landscape of the rest of the research that's been done. So you want to make sure that you're looking at and thinking about those things. The significance, after you've conducted your lit review, when someone reads it, they should be able to have a very clear understanding of why your research is important. You have to write a section in chapter 1 called Significance of the Problem. Significance of the study, what's it called? Significance of the study. So how are you going to figure out what's important about your study? Well, from your lit review, you're going to know, based on what's already been done, what your study is adding to the broader body of knowledge about your field. Originality, well, if it's already been done, you can't do it, right? Now, you can take, and there's nothing wrong with doing this, You can take a study that's previously been done and duplicate it or replicate it, but you have to have a new twist on it. You have to be establishing a new set of knowledge. So even if you do the exact same methodology, you're using maybe different people, different types of participants. Or maybe you're looking at something that was done in 1990 and you want to update it that now this is the 2010s. So those are all right to do, but you have to be able to know, the reader should be able to know, okay, this is what's original about this study. So all of your things need to establish that. Dr. Henley's going to talk to you later about the funnel method of organizing your lit review. So you need broad topics as well as very specific. A lot of people ask, well, how many articles should I have? How many references should I have? How current do they need to be? And you know, unfortunately, the answer is, well, that depends. And it depends on what kind of a study you're doing. Qualitative studies require, I think, more background information than a quantitative study. Not more references, but more the background to build what you're going to try and get out of your participants. Let's see, I lost my train of thought. I was thinking about qualitative studies. Oh, broad, yeah. So you want broad studies, and then you want to narrow it down so that the studies you are describing are very close to what you want to do, but in a different way. It's okay to have studies that are older, because you're trying to establish a background, a context for where you're going. But the studies, as you get closer and closer to what you're doing, the studies need to be current. And you need to be able to talk about what those researchers or authors did, the methods that they used to come up with the conclusions that they drew, and you need to be able to kind of critique those things, to think about them, to think, how is what they did different or similar to what I want to do? Okay. So quantity, it's hard to think about quantity. Maybe, you know, we say 40, 50, somewhere in that range. Dr. Henley, the other day, he and I were talking about a chapter 2 that he read, and he said, yeah, it was pretty good, but she really didn't have very many references. So I went back and looked at it because I've worked with that student, and she really only had about 10 good references. So that's not enough. You need to be able to establish a little bit more the background for what you're building towards. So let's talk about resources that you might be able to use. There is a handout that's called Sources for Literature Review. I can't tell you enough how much or how helpful the librarians at A&M Commerce are. There are librarians on the main campus in Commerce. There's an excellent librarian. Megan is the new librarian at the Metroplex, and they want to help. They really want to help you. I mean, if you go in there, you may need to make an appointment, but they really want to be helpful. They're very interested in helping you find the kinds of information that you need. Scott Lancaster, Dr. Scott Lancaster, is the Research and Instruction Librarian for the College of Education and Human Services. Now, he's on the main campus in Commerce, but I left you his phone number and his office number here, and he is very willing to meet with you and help you to find some sources, or a lot of times you may see, I know in ProQuest, for example, you know, that's where the dissertations are. I know sometimes you find things listed in ProQuest, but then you can't find them. Well, Scott or Megan, either one of them are happy to do their own little magic behind the scenes and help you find that dissertation. Because it's just a kink in the way that things are listed, but they can help you with all of that. I have listed a bunch of different links that are available through the library that can help you find, you know, whatever sorts of things you're looking for. A lot of good links there. A lot of databases. I gave you the URL for those. Lots of different ones. Don't just get stuck in ERIC. You know, there's a whole world of databases out there to look in. If you're looking for, you know, specific topics, and again, the librarians, they can help you if you have a topic but you really can't find much on it. You know, I find it hard to believe in this day and age that there's not information out there about any topic that you choose. There's really very few new things under the sun, unfortunately. But maybe that's fortunate. So all of those are out there. Web-based information. Let's talk about that real quick. We're all so quick to just say, oh, let me Google it. Well, you know, Google is great, or Bing, or Yahoo, or whatever search engine that you want to use. Those things are great, and they will pull up articles just as quick as, you know, as you blink your eye. Stuff is there. But you have to be careful. You have to be very careful about web-based material. Some of it is worthwhile, some of it is not anything that you want to put in your very professional Chapter 2 literature review. There are, you know, it'll give you newspaper articles, and there's nothing wrong with newspaper articles, but you don't want a whole, but you don't want to base your literature review on newspaper articles. So I've given you a list of some things about web-based information, things you need to think about as you go through. What's the source? How qualified is that person? What are their credentials? What kind of authority do they have? How current is the information? You know, look at when the last update was. We have so many organizations and associations that print their own materials and put them out there on the internet for us. And some of those things are okay. Some of them, maybe not so much. Yes, Liz?
Dr. Dixon, the part about bias when you're talking about organizations, even though the organizations may support and publish their own journals, and they say that they're peer reviewed, are we to look at them like that, as scholarly as we would like maybe something from like IRA or anything? I mean, that's
no, I think you need to be very careful about that. Organizations, you know, and there's just all sorts of let's see, what do you call it? Predatory journals out there that people pay to get their articles published in those. And they say they're peer reviewed, but you know, I can get my article published if I'm willing to pay to put it in there. How peer reviewed is that, you know? So you have to be really careful. ERIC's another thing in the, I don't know how much they do this now, but it used to be that you just dropped your paper from the conference into a bucket when you left the conference and ERIC published it. Well, that's not a peer review exactly. So you have to be very careful about those sources. You have to think about the bias and if you're looking at something from an organization, if it's an organization for, you know, mothers of special ed children, well, of course they're biased about their children and how they should be treated. And you know, so you want to be sure that you have the other side of the story always too. And that's another thing I didn't touch on, but I will just real quickly. There's always more than one side to a story. And it's okay to have the conflicting sides in your lit review. In fact, you probably should. If there's good and bad things that people say, you want both of those things in there to try and get that across. Okay, so I'm almost out of my time. The last thing I want to talk about is this hourglass. Not too long ago, a student's dissertation proposal got kicked back from the grad school, and he said, no, he didn't like it, and the biggest complaint was the lit review. So Dr. Plata and I went to talk to Dr. Zellhart, and I said to him, seems like you're really picking on chapter 2 now. And he said, I am. He said, now all people's methodology is good. They're coming up with, good statements of the problem, good research questions. He said, so now I'm turning my sights to the lit review. So even more important, because now that's what he's really focusing on. He wants to make sure that it's a good, solid lit review. Because some of them have not been, in the past, have not been as good as they probably should be. So as we were talking, he said, I like the hourglass method. Well, in education, we've got all kinds of cute pictures, and, Dr. Henley's going to talk about the funnel method. Here's the hourglass method, and, we have those all the time. But this is actually what the whole dissertation is like. It is also what journal articles can be like. So you start from the broad, which is, all the things that have happened before. You focus down to the narrow, which is your research, your results, and then by the time you get out to chapter 5, you've broadened it out to implications, future topics for reference. So the lit review you see is right here in the background and theory, where you've got the concepts, the lit review, the causal explanations that other people have offered, not your idea about what's causing that. Because you haven't done the study yet. I mean, of course you have an idea. That's why you're interested in that topic. But as I said, you don't get to offer your opinion on anything till chapter 5. So you don't want to look like you're biasing your lit review one way or the other when there's more than one side to the story. So you can just think about the hourglass method as a way to organize your entire dissertation. Not just the lit review. Okay, that's it from me. I'm going to turn everything over to Dr. Henley. I got to get out of this. Get me out. Okay.
I'm not going to keep going.
I don't do that. Okay. And when you're done, you can push that and turn green. Do you want me to help?
Yes.
Be sure you leave that section in there so I
Yes, yes, just do this. Well, now you turn it off. There you go.
All right. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take about 5 minutes or so, and I'm going to reiterate 2 or 3 points that Dr. Denson made, because as we all know in education, repetition is good. Then we're going to roll up our sleeves. We're going to get right with God this morning, and I'm going to tell you exactly how to write a lit review. We're going to get real concrete, okay? So the points that I want to reiterate are as follows. First, if you are writing a dissertation in any academic discipline, at any credible university in the country, at the time you defend it, there should not be, and this is not hyperbole, this is honest, there should not be 10 or 20 people in the world who know more about that topic than you do, okay? By definition, you should now be one of the key experts in that topic. One of the ways that you validate, or that you establish, or that you make legitimate that expertise is by showing that you know all of what was done previously on that topic, okay? So when Dr. Denson says that I can't give you a number, and I can't give you a number, because maybe your topic only has 5 or 10 previous studies. Maybe your topic has 500 or 600 previous studies, okay? Now, you don't probably need to cover 500 or 600 because many of them are going to be dated and have been previously summarized otherwise. But again, you can't really establish a number a priori, but what I am telling you is you need to be exhaustive and encyclopedic. You need to, in fact, step up to the plate and be the expert. And the only way you can be the expert is if you have that mastery of that previous material. Another point I want to reiterate is that the purpose of the lit review is not just to establish your expertise, but it is also to reach out and take the reader by the hand and bring them on a trip with you through the rest of this document. So you need to start in some way that is engaging, and you need to start in some way that is approachable. Okay? And then, ever what metaphor you use, funnel, hourglass, roadmap, and as Dr. Denson said, there's many of them out there. They're all okay. But ultimately, bear in mind, you have a reader who doesn't know you, perhaps doesn't have your knowledge, hopefully doesn't have anything like your knowledge of this topic. So you've got to introduce them gently and slowly from the most foundational, the oldest, the broadest notions, down to the particulars of your study. Okay? The third thing, and the last one I want to reiterate, and I don't want to turn Dr. Zellhart into a boogeyman. He's just, like the rest of us, another cog in the great machine. He's doing his job. But Dr. Denson is absolutely correct that Dr. Zellhart currently, not that he's not interested in these other matters like methodology and research design, but he's currently got the lit review on his radar screen. Just a week or so ago, there was one that had passed through our office and that I had read, and it was, in my opinion, perfectly good. And it was another one that didn't really get bounced back, but before it was going to be signed off on, they wanted some changes put in the lit review. And as Dr. Denson said, specifically what Dr. Zellhart had identified was that the depth of the discussion about the articles covered did not kind of meet his standards. That is, that while an ample amount of literature was covered and it was well written, it didn't really say enough about that to understand its significance or its place in that background. So again, just name dropping is probably going to be insufficient. All right, I think I've reiterated those 3 points. So like I said, now let's think concretely about how to write this. I'm going to cover 3 or 4 more points as I do this, but here's how I want to start. Once you've got a topic, you need to find at least one journal article on your topic, hopefully that's methodologically close to what you're doing, that is very well written, one that you like, one that is clearly published in a quality journal. And then what you are going to do is you are going to make it an absolute model for everything else you do. Okay? Now I'm telling you to find a journal article, not a previous dissertation. So there is a matter of scale that's different here. Your dissertation is going to be bigger in every sense than a journal article. But excepting for that matter of scale, the organization and the voice in every how-to question that you come across, and I can't be more serious here. Every time you say, well, how do I do that? How do I do that? It's in that published article. You do it the way they did it, okay? Now, I'm not talking about plagiarizing anything. I'm talking about there is a right way to write academic information. There's a right way to organize an introduction, method, results, etc. And if you are drawing from a model, from a well-vetted, top-quality journal, then the way in front of you, right there on that piece of paper, is the right way, okay? So when it comes to how do I organize this, how much do I say about it, how do I group different studies into one paragraph or a few pages, look at what they did. And again, at one level that sounds so simple that it's just one of those things that kind of wants to go on one ear and out the other, but at the other level, I'm telling you, for every question you ever have, well, how would you talk about this? Go to your art. How did they talk about that? I have 3 or 4 papers that are similar, 2 or 3 that disagree. Well, again, in a good lit review, so did they. How did they talk about that? Okay. Almost every question, indeed probably every question you're going to encounter is answered right there for you in that model. The next thing that you really need to extract from that model, and I can't underscore this enough, is what I call voice. All right? Now, you don't have to be a bad writer to be an academic writer. But there is an academic voice. And by bad, I'm not talking about poor grammar or whatever. I'm thinking you don't have to sound arrogant or pompous or use stilted language or all these sophisticated terms. That's what I meant when I was saying bad. That's not necessary. And in fact, good articles don't have any of that. They are, again, reaching out, inviting the reader, bringing that reader along with them. But here are the things you really need to think about with respect to voice. First, avoid being too casual or familiar. Again, you don't have to sound pompous or arrogant, but neither should it read like a letter from summer camp to your grandmother. Okay? And not always, but frequently, and especially, again, if you're doing a project local to you, it is familiar to you. Maybe the subjects, the participants, the idea behind it are all things that are dealt with casually by you on a daily basis. But again, bear in mind, you've got to change that voice and get it to the right audience. Okay? The second thing you need to be really careful of, and I see this a lot and I mark it up a lot, is using absolute language. The words like must, always, generally don't obtain in any academic enterprise. Now, we're not doing physics or chemistry for the most part here, or other sorts of sciences, but we are still doing an intellectual endeavor where we don't typically think about certitudes, okay? We think about established patterns, we think about evidence persuading us that something is the case. So be very careful, both in terms of how you're evaluating literature and how you're articulating the logic of your paper, even how you're evaluating your own results, that you're not kind of overselling this, all right? The other bit of voice, and Katie did mention this, that you need to be careful about is making statements, and this is probably the thing that all 3 of us mark up the most when we're doing reviews of literature, is making statements of fact without any support that are not common knowledge. So for example, and I'm just making this up as I go, but people may say something like, all special needs children have behavioral management issues in the classroom. Do they? I mean, there are literally, I've never read a dissertation that didn't have multiple instances of a statement like that, where it's not followed by a citation based on some study, and it's not an established fact like the sun rises in the east or whatever that you don't have to make a citation to. It is essentially a statement of opinion that you are offering as fact, and that certainly is something that you should not do unless you have the appropriate citations. if you will turn to the one with the funnel looking thing.
I left my phone up there for you, if you just wanna.
Okay. So we're actually ahead of time now. Since we're actually ahead of time now.
If you are, it's okay. We'll just have time for questions
She
and
said it was 9:45. Okay.
it's 9:48.
Well, we're supposed to start at 9:50, so.
No. Oh. Oh, yes.
Okay.
Goodness. I got off, sorry.
All right, it's all good.
Yes, yes.
No problem.
At any rate, so this paper, this handout, which is entitled Structuring the Literature Review, offers you this funnel method. The funnel method is not at all inconsistent or competing with the hourglass method, it's simply the top part of it. The funnel method also is, as I said, one of many. It's not even one I necessarily. Katie was looking for a handout, and I said, oh, I'm sure you can find handouts for the funnel method. It's not necessarily one that I would even tell every student this is absolutely how you need to use, but it's as good as any, maybe better than most. Let me just take a second, though, as I said, to point out that it's not the only way to do this. There is another metaphor that I like that is a roadmap metaphor, okay? Where basically you're literally thinking about, I want to guide the person to some point that I'm making, which is going to be the need to do this particular study, okay? And so what kind of instructions would I have to give someone to get them from not knowing anything, trying to tell somebody where to get to a restaurant in your hometown and they're not from there, where do you need to start, right? So again, find some metaphor, they all do the same thing. They may move you from these general foundational notions into more specific and concrete notions. One of the things that's not clear from any of those metaphors is, well, what's my batting order for talking about topics? Again, maybe the way to do that is to simply think in terms of scope, that the more general the topic is, probably the earlier I want to cover it, the more specific it relates to my study, the later in the funnel I want to cover it. Another way that you might organize the body of literature that you have is historically or chronologically. You might think about, well, how did people first get interested in this question? What were the first theories and ideas relevant to this? What did the early research contribute? And then just move up chronologically. So there's not a one-size-fits-all answer here, but between those sorts of metaphors, and especially the funnel, hopefully you get a general idea. The next thing that I want to cover is, so you've gone out, you've found some literature. As Katie said and I reiterated, how much literature is hard to know. It is going to depend upon your topic and how much previous work is already out there. But you started digging into this. How much do you want to say about a given paper, and what kind of information do you want to extract from that paper? Okay? This is another place where I can't underscore enough to let that model journal article be your guide. What kinds of things did they extract from the literature that they are reviewing in their introduction? Are they covering some papers in a full paragraph, grouping others together? Again, you need to find something that is as close to what you're doing as possible, well written. Use that as a model. Because, like I said, for some topic on which there are already hundreds of papers, you probably can group a lot of journal articles together and treat dozens of them, or at least a half a dozen of them, in one paragraph. On the other hand, there may be a paper, even in a topic that's got a lot of research, but especially a little research, that is so unique in terms of its approach, its subjects, its methodology, its findings, that it needs more attention, special attention. I know I'm repeating myself, but I'm doing that on purpose. If you will look at that model, you'll see again that it's not one size fits all. Another issue that we encounter when we're reviewing these that happens with a lot of pretty good students. You get to a lit review and they've covered a lot of literature and they've done a really nice job, but it literally reads, and it probably literally is, the case that as they were going through their journal articles, they wrote out a note card or a couple of paragraphs, summary information. And when you get to reading their chapter 2, it literally is if someone had handed you a stack of note cards. Kind of read one, you turn to the next one, you read the next one. Again, just because you're doing academic writing doesn't mean you have to be a bad writer. There has to be some connective tissue here. There has to be a narrative thread, a narrative focus. Those old axioms, and many of you I'm sure have been classroom teachers, tell them what you're going to tell them what you told them. Stopping and summarizing, contrasting and comparing. Again, like I said, frequently I will read a person who's obviously done a good job with the lit review, okay? But it is totally on the reader to make the connections between this paragraph and this paragraph, all right? That's not good writing, and again, that's something that we'll catch and we'll want you to remediate, but you should try to fix early on. So again, you're sitting there saying, well, how do I transition from one topic to another? How do I segue between these people? Guess what? Go back to that model, okay? You've got a published journal article. Look at how they end paragraphs. Look at how they begin paragraphs. Look at when they stop to be synthetic, when they stop to summarize. So just be mindful that the review of the literature can be quite good and quite complete and still be off-putting to the reader. Still not be well designed to accomplish ultimately what you do want to accomplish, which again is this. And I've said this before, but now let me try to say it in a little more depth now that we've talked about a few other things in a little more detail. What you need to do in chapter 2 is to take someone who may not know anything in the world about your topic, but is an educated layman. So if you are writing it and presenting it well, they can follow it and understand it. So take someone who is ignorant but smart. What do you need to tell them to get them to understand why this is worth doing? What do you need to tell them to get them to understand what they need to know to make sense of the problem? What do you need to tell them so that they can get up to speed on how other people have thought about this and how it's being conceived of and thought about currently? And if you're really, really good at this, this is how it works. If you're really, really good at this, you take that ignorant but educated layman who doesn't know anything about this literature, and you have walked them through this, and you know, as you read, you kind of got a story, an internal narrative in your own head, right? Reading along a novel or whatever the case is, you're kind of already there. Some of you look like you don't believe it. You don't believe that you do that? Listen to this sentence. The old man's glasses were filled with sherry. Now, if nothing interesting happened to you when I said that sentence, then maybe you don't have an internal narrative. But for most of you, you probably had a little moment there where you realized you were building a story of what was going to come next already in your head while it was unfolding, right? You thought I was going to say needed to be clean or whatever. At any rate, my point is all readers do that, okay? You've got that internal narrative going on. So going back to my person who is intelligent but ignorant, if you have written a really good, top-notch introduction, this is what happens. By the time they're done with it, in that internal narrative in their head, they say, you know, there's one more study that really needs to be done here. There's one study that would definitively answer this question. And when they turn to the method, guess what? Lo and behold, it's the study that they're about to read. Okay? So if you have written this correctly, you have taken them from ground zero, not just so that they understand your study, but you have motivated why this is the study that has to be done. Okay? Why, given the existing literature, this is now the hot question, the $64 question, the one that we have to do. Okay? Okay, we're off of time. I can either expand on this or you can circle back.
It's my fault. I just looked at my little calendar on it. Do you all have questions? We have a question time later, but up till right now, do you have questions? Liz?
I'm writing down because I had overheard and inferred that we're gonna have a Q&A later, so I can wait.
You can go ahead.
I know you keep referring to a model article that we, of our choosing. Just out of curiosity, would the office be providing any, look for things that have this particular?
No, I think what you should do, that is actually a great question. And again, I teach undergraduates, honor students, doctoral students, graduate students, research design for 30 years. And I know that sometimes you tell people something, it's like one of those Zen koans, right? It's so simple that you think, oh, there can't really be a truth to that. And then, 15 years later, you realize, oh, God, that's what it meant, right? Trust me when I tell you this. You and your advisor, based upon what your topic is. I am not a domain expert over all your all's topics, probably none of your all's topics, okay? You and your advisor should be able to identify a relatively current, canonical article, okay, that is relevant, something you're certainly going to be citing and talking about, that you both agree is well written and would be a good model. It's been thoroughly vetted because it's published in a top-flight journal. And then again, you say, gosh, I don't even know how to write the first sentence. Well, how did they start? Did they start by talking about something in current events? Did they start by citing a classic study from the 1800s? Did they start by mentioning, recent research? Again, I'm not telling you you have to model each and every aspect of it, but every question you have, how much do I say about something? How do I organize these? How do I segue from one topic to another? Do I need subheadings? That was another point we had talked about. We can say a little bit more about that in a moment. But all of those questions will be answered by looking at that model, okay? But no, our office doesn't have kind of one definitive paper because it needs to be a paper that is as close to what you're doing as is possible. Because what would count as a good article on special education would not be necessarily a good model for a good article on, psychometrics or educational research, okay? Other questions?
I have a question about the replication and using the absolute model. And I think I'm understanding what you're saying. we're looking for information that we can put a different twist or.
Okay, let me clarify something, and I do apologize, because again, you've asked a really good question. Let me make sure I'm clear on this. I am not saying go find a paper and replicate it. It's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is matter of fact, I don't even give a flip if you read the methods and results section of this paper, okay? What I'm telling you is find a paper to be a writing model, okay? It does not match, actually, it's not entirely true, because it needs probably to be methodologically similar to what you're going to do, so it is motivated the right kind of thinking, okay?
Like quantitative versus
Absolutely,
qualitative.
absolutely, qualitative versus quantitative. So it's not that the method is completely irrelevant. That is overstatement. But what I'm telling you is don't plagiarize it, don't replicate it. Use it as a guide to the questions you're asking when you're struggling to write the lit review, okay? How much do I say? How do I transition topics? How do I talk about a study? I mean, even just the talking about a study. In general in academia, you never mention an author's credentials. You don't say Dr. So-and-so said, their first name, or their location, unless there's a reason to do so, okay? Or unless they are such a canonical, noble, noted figure, all right, would be appropriate to say, for example, President Barack Obama, right? Not Obama 2012 or whatever. But outside of very few special cases, that's not, when you read a journal article, anything you'll ever see. You'll never see in a legitimate peer-reviewed journal article, Dr. Peter Smith at UCLA Medical School. It's just not how it's written, okay? So again, when I began and I said we're going to roll for sleeves and be concrete, I'm being serious. But rather than me stand up here and go through each of these points, you got a model right in front of you. You don't have me right in front of you. You're sitting there with you, whispering in your ear while you're typing on the computer, but you do have a model. So even at the point of saying, how do I introduce this? Do I cite this person at the end of the paragraph? Do I cite them right after their name at the beginning of the paragraph? Should I begin with their name? Again, being real concrete. Another thing that makes me know some people are working from note cards. Every paragraph begins the same way, okay? And again, you don't have to be a bad writer in academia. And that starts to look like bad writing when every paragraph begins the same way. If you look at your model, I bet you one begins Smith 1984, and the next paragraph then says, you know, and in the next decade, what we saw was a variety of other researchers. It doesn't begin with just somebody's name and a date, okay? It has a little bit of narrative style to it. It has flow. It reads well.
Yes, and on that note, is it appropriate, if you have a true personal connection to your topic, to insert a personal narrative, just a small one, at the broad part, like at the top, to bring in your
I'll give you
audience?
two answers to that question. One came to the office just last week. I would say in general, if you are doing a quantitative study, there's almost no reason for there to be anything about you in that study at all, okay? Now, I've already told you to avoid things like must and always, so no doubt somewhere under the sun there is some instance of a perfectly good reason why we need to know something about you before we can do this chi-square, this analysis of variance, all right? But at the moment I can't think of what that would be, all right? Now, if you are doing a qualitative study and you are the one collecting the information, one of the issues that you will need to cover somewhere is this issue of bracketing, okay? You're going to need to establish that you appreciate that you have a perspective and to establish that your perspective has not contaminated, biased, confounded the process of you trying to get other people's perspective. Okay? You've all watched enough lawyers on TV to know leading questions. You know, what were you doing in the house when this person was murdered? Right? Well, I wasn't there. Back and say, you know, well, there's even a commercial on TV now where the guy's talking to his insurance agent, and and it ends with him saying, and then by the time he was done asking me all these questions, I forgot to even tell him I wasn't in the car, right? You know. So it is certainly the case that if you are doing a qualitative piece of work, you will need to talk about your beliefs, goals, aspirations, opinions, your situation to establish that you have bracketed that from contaminating the data gathering process.
But that doesn't go in chapter 2.
No, probably not.
No.
That's why I said sort of
Yeah.
two answers. I can't really imagine, and in fact, and I know David got a CC on this. Not too long ago, I actually had a student who had a whole lot of biographical stuff in chapter 2. And I indicated that I thought that was kind of not appropriate. There was some disagreement on the part of the advisor, but it was essentially that in chapter 2 there was a discussion about why I'm interested in this topic. You get to do this little thing in a dissertation called the vita at the end, okay? And you even, maybe at the beginning, you know, can have some acknowledgments. Those are good places to say why I'm interested in this topic. In general, chapter 2 is not. Other questions? Well, the one other topic that we had talked about covering, and again, I apologize, we've gotten a little bit out of cue here, but is the use of subheadings or not. Here's some things you want to consider. First, how long is your chapter 2? If it is in fact quite lengthy, then subheadings can be a real friend of yours, okay? Because people can only hold so much information in their heads at once. Matter of fact, I'll give you something else real concrete here. Avoid sentences longer than about 16 words. There's all these studies of technical writing that show that people start to get a diminished understanding in a sentence longer than that. I usually won't mark that unless the sentence has bad grammar. And you can write perfectly grammatical sentence that has a whole lot more words in it than that, and sometimes you need to, okay? But here's one I will always mark. Avoid paragraphs that run more than a page. There's no reason to ever do that, okay? But again, almost every dissertation they'll get kind of excited, they'll get in tune with something, and they'll just keep writing on that paragraph and writing on that paragraph, and you know, sometimes it just spins over by a sentence or two, but even that's too long. But I have seen, on a regular basis, we see paragraphs that run 3, 4, 5 pages. People can't hold that much information in their head, right? You have paragraph is there for a reason. So back to this question of, do you need subheadings? If you have a lengthy chapter 2, subheadings can be incredibly beneficial for organizing the information and being a friend to the reader, telling them, here is a section. We're now done with that section, so you can take a little break, you can go to the bathroom, you can clear the brain, and we're going to start another section, all right? In the absence of subheadings, people tend to try to hold all that together at once. Some other concrete things to think about subheadings. If you're going to use them, make sure they're consistent with APA style, okay? It's also the case that your advisor may or may not feel strongly about subheadings. In my own home department of psychology, I have some colleagues who are kind of subheading happy. They're happy even to see a subheading at the level of paragraphs. I don't like subheadings at the level of paragraphs, but I like subheadings. I think if you're introducing, imagine you're looking at 4 or 5 variables: teacher experience, teacher ethnicity, teacher gender. Then each of those you could imagine reviewing that literature as a subheading, okay? So that would be a sensible kind of way to break those up. But again, do talk with your major professor. Your major professor is your primary resource, more than Dr. Zellhart in the graduate school, more than me and Katie and Max. They're the person that you ultimately have to please. We're not going to be setting at your dissertation defense, okay? Probably not going to be at your dissertation defense. They're the person there, so they're the one that ultimately you need to organize this the way they want it. What else? Other questions?
So we thought that we would take a quick break, but I think Dr. Holt wants to say something first. Quick announcement, and then we'll take a short break, and when we come back, Dr. Plata's going to talk about plagiarism. And you'll probably have a lot of questions after he speaks.
And then, let me go ahead and say this as well. There is another question and answer session, so if you've got other questions, you just be in shine out. It's also the case all 3 of us are going to hang around other than a little lunch break for the whole day, so if you want to catch us individually, that's great.
The question and answer is going to be right after the plagiarism.
Okay, go Dr. Holt.
No, thank you, man. Thank you. Great to see you guys here today. I know a lot of y'all are ed folks. We have a large department and a lot of folks getting started on dissertation right now. I just want to give you some directions about this afternoon. We'll be breaking up into rooms smaller than this, 2 or 3 professors per room, and we'll kind of have an agenda, but it really depends on who's here, who comes, and where they're at. So we're going to adjust to people that are further along in the process, and those who are just beginning, and we may pair up. These folks are going to help us with some individuals this afternoon if we're far enough along. But we'll be in the room starting right down this hall, like 143, 145, 153, 54. Anyway, your professor's name will be on the door. That's how you know to go in. So find that door and go inside. And that's what we'll have. I have to add something to what Dr. Henley, this has been so valuable this morning. I add one thing to what Dr. Henley said. In going through this process, I wanted you all to know that the students I watched do this, those that we call this meeting this afternoon a jumpstart meeting, but those that actually get a jumpstart on dissertation do more about literature review and understand what a dissertation looks like. Believe it or not, I've had people come to me and hadn't even read a dissertation and said, "How you gonna write one of these? You haven't even studied them yet." So particularly one about your area of interest. So I can't tell you how valuable it is when you talk about that model to have some idea of what a good dissertation looks like, and particularly one in your area or field or topic of interest. So incredibly valuable. Spend some time in our database. Our library has every dissertation almost imaginable. So look at it. Thank y'all. We'll be meeting after lunch. We're here. Would all the ed professors just stand up and raise your hand just for a second? So if you know, this is Dr. Goodwin. Those of you who don't know, Dr. Munoz, Dr. Ortloff, raise your hands. There, those. Dr. Ballinger's next right there. Dr. Kemp Graham, Dr. Armidi, and I think Dr. Borgmiggy's kind of been in and out the door here. So I think that's everything. All right. Thank y'all. We look forward to this afternoon.
The break room.
Dr. Thompson, he's here also somewhere.
Thank you so much. Very attentive group this morning. Appreciate you doing that. Let me see.
Well, both Katie and I made mention of, and I had a couple of questions in the break about the fact that Dr. Zellhart, is still looking at the whole thing. It's not that you just read chapter 2, be clear about that. But that initially, I think he had a focus more on research design, was more about methodology. and that focus has now shifted so that kind of the part that he feels needs a shot in the arm, needs to be bolstered, now that he feels that the research design issues are kind of under control, is this question about the lit review. I think both of us said this, but let's repeat it just briefly and try to clarify if need be. It is mostly a question about the depth of how you are treating the things that you are citing, okay? Again, I was saying just a week or so ago, one that had passed through our office and was well written, and the guy passed, it was not an issue like that. But Paul did call me in, and he sent a lot of feedback to the students, and he said, you know, I know you looked at this, but he said, what I think we need here is to make sure that these people are establishing that what they are citing really is kind of appropriate to the point they're trying to make. And concretely, for example, if someone has used a very, very different type of subject than you are using, then that might call things potentially into question. Now, we're not saying don't cite that, but we're saying kind of you need complete disclosure. So, for example, if you were doing, you know, in a rural school and third graders and all the literature previously been in urban high schools, okay? Just citing the results is not sufficient, and Paul is correct about this. You need to contextualize that those results, while they are interesting and you're building off of them, are based on a different sample than the one you will be using. So I'm trying to be concrete about what it is you're looking for. I don't want you to throw something out and scare you. It's not the case. That's not the point. But he just wants to make sure that you're not treating that study as if it were exactly like your study, that you are acknowledging that because of its method or its sample, that those results, while important and germane, and you need to talk about them, you know, need to be qualified in that way. That's what he means when he says a more in-depth, so I'm trying to get to be specific here. When he says a more in-depth, a more critical analysis, that's the kind of thing he's talking about.
Right, and he doesn't mean that you have to critique the methodology necessarily. Like, you don't have to say they did a t-test when they really should have done something else. Not that necessarily. I mean, if you see a glaring error, I know if I taught you statistics, you can see a glaring error, right?
Yes.
Right, okay. But anyway, you don't have to critique it at that level, but exactly what Dr. Henley was saying, you know, just acknowledge that this sample isn't like mine, but you can still build on what they found. But don't just take someone's findings at face value and say, yep, this makes it true. Be thoughtful about it. Look at their findings and think to yourself, I mean, you should be doing that anyway. Look at those findings and think, does this apply to my study? Yeah, it does to some extent. Why not? And discuss that. That makes it a thoughtful lit review. And if you look at the model that Tracy kept talking about, they do that in professional journal articles. They'll talk about other people's studies, that they did this, but there's a qualifier. Not that they were bad studies, but that they're wanting to extend it or use a different population or do something a little bit differently. They acknowledge that. Okay, Dr. Plata is going to spend some time talking to you about a very, very important topic, plagiarism. Because I remember how hard it was to write a lit review, and you know, you've got it there in front of you and you think, I just can't say it in any different words. I just can't do it any other way. However, plagiarism is rampant and it's a huge issue that we have to deal with. And so Dr. Plata's done a good bit of work on plagiarism and understanding all the different types, so he's going to spend some time talking to you about that.
Thank you, Dr. King. Yes, indeed. This is kind of like the lemon juice in the stuff here that's kind of souring, but I don't want you to feel it that way. Plagiarism is important. I'll tell you why. You are going to be, you're being developed into the next gatekeepers. Gatekeepers. What are we talking about? We have to talk about academic integrity when I say that. You're going to have to guard what a doctorate is supposed to be. What does it mean? You don't want, you definitely don't want to go to a medical doctor that plagiarized and got by with the skin of his teeth and all that, and he cheated and all that. What field is that? Well, I think it's just as valid to talk about the quality and the integrity of a doctorate in education. You're dealing with kids. Somehow, I think all of you are in education, am I correct? Who's not in education? See, you're all in education. Somehow, in some form or some position, you have to deal with those really human beings. Early on, all the way through, wherever you are. So you're dealing with humans, and so you have to talk, we have to deal with this thing of integrity, the academic integrity. There are some handouts I gave you, but let's just begin by saying, what is plagiarism? Now, the definition that I gave you on the first handout in defining plagiarism is pretty simple. And I'm going to tear it apart in a little bit and say it's not totally correct. And I'll talk about that a bit later. But now, I'm really concerned nowadays, not when Dr. Henry and I were growing up and doing our doctoral dissertations, because we had to do all this stuff by hand. We went to the library and dug stuff out by hand. We didn't have computers. And I see you guys right in front of you. I don't know of a single one I haven't seen with the computers. You're very vulnerable with the technology that's available to you. Just like Dr. Dixon said, I can't say it any other way, so I just copy it. That's where you start having problems. You start talking about how do we paraphrase, and there's a whole skill set there. How do you paraphrase? It's not as easy as you think. And if you have the skill, God bless you. That's wonderful. I'd like to have it.
If you don't have the skill, go look at your model. How did they paraphrase?
Right. And, you know, I'm reviewing literature all the time for my little rinky-dink articles. And it's tough. It's tough to say, okay, now, what did they say? How did they say it? And indeed, what Dr. Henley talked about is very true about getting the model, the one research article. I'll never forget my very first article that I attempted. That's exactly the way I succeeded. And I was successful in getting that sucker published in a pretty reputable journal, because I would look at the journal article and I said, okay, now how did they say that? And it was pretty similar to what I was doing, but I wanted to expand it. I would have shown a better way to do what they were doing, okay? It was occupational prestige. Anyway, so we need to talk about what is plagiarism? Where can you get the stuff to plagiarize? Well, look at all the stuff that I listed, and this is the first handout, defining plagiarism. It says, what are the sources of plagiarism? My God, I left a lot of them out. Because I'm not that astute. Remember, I'm an old fogey still. I'm trying to catch up. But I gave you enough information here to let you know that it's everywhere. Information is everywhere, and like I said, you have access to it because of your little computers right in your hand. So you need to be careful. Well, yes, ma'am.
Dr. Plata, just a question. Plagiarism, can it be avoided as long as you're citing the person who said it first?
No. That's what I meant by a while ago. Let me explain what that definition is. It's a plagiarism person, the writer deliberately uses someone else's language, idea, or other material without acknowledging its source. They would say, but I did cite it. No, that's not good enough. Yes and no. It's never a clear cut. Because if you will get the examples, it says samples of plagiarism sheet. And I want you to find the one that says aggregator. Aggregator. It's the back and front. Now, take a little bit of time and read the one on the left, which is, and by the way, the one on the left, paragraph on the left, is always the same as you go to retrieve or find or replace or remix. Read that and then see how it was handled by the next writer. And you'll understand what I said about, no, just because you cited it, it doesn't mean that you did not plagiarize. Okay, read that. Okay? You see it now? Well cited. Very well cited. That was plagiarism. That's considered a certain kind of plagiarism, which brings us to the next thing. Look at the sheet, single page sheet, no back and front. It's just types of plagiarism. And not just one simple kind of plagiarism. It's several kinds. And these are in order of the frequency by which they have been used. These are, it says, the first one says clone, 9.5 out of 10. So that's a very widely used way of plagiarizing. Now, I didn't do the study, Turnitin did, and that, that's a big outfit. So I kind of go with what they found, and I know it's probably not the truth, but it gives us an idea.
Well, and again, let me interrupt.
Yes, sir.
One thing you should know, maybe you already know, but the graduate school will run your dissertation or whatever through Turnitin. It is a big national database that hunts for plagiarism, and then it generates a report. And so, for example, if your lit review, chapter 2 is 20 pages long, and 18 pages of the text are quotations from somebody, then Dr. Zellhart's going to have a problem with that. Even if you have cited those things correctly, your words were less than 10% of the document, right? So I mean that, but Dr. Zellhart will turn it in, and it will generate him a report.
Did that kind of get at what the answer to what you were asking? And I know, no, but you asked a question a while ago. Now do you understand why I said it? You say yes or no? And I think, okay, all right. Now, if you'll notice, there are 10 of these, and the aggregator that we looked at is number 8 in use. It's only used 2.5 times out of 10. But nevertheless, we see a lot of that in my office. Now, having said that, how can I do run some stuff in Turnitin because that should be the advisor doing that, and I think most of them are doing that. Okay, and so here I am reading this manuscript, this proposal, and oh man, there's all kinds of things going on, and I've given suggestions and all that. They'll say that I've already received my feedback. You understand what I'm talking about? I've got a lot of comments on the margins, and so on. And man, just all kinds of things. All of a sudden, it's smooth sailing. No problem. I said, whoops, something's going on. I dig it out. I take time to dig out what's going on. So what I look at is a citation that they used. Go dig it out. Sure enough, guess what they did? They probably changed some words here and there. As you will see in this type of plagiarism, the explanation for each of those, and you'll find one of those that says replaces with synonyms and so on. But the sentence structure is basically the same. And you'll see examples of that also in the samples of plagiarism. If you keep reading that, you'll see that. Okay. Yes, where are we? Yes.
Well, because the lit review is so heavy and it's usually lengthy, and it's not any of our original work. In fact, that one almost seems as if, how do you incorporate some original work into a lit review that is not your work?
Okay, this is where, yeah, I understand. That's where paraphrasing comes in. That's where Dr. Henry talked about you can group a lot of studies that were done on a specific topic and summarize what those articles were about for a specific topic, which may be your topic or close to your topic.
Okay, well, I guess I was reading it wrong when you said it contains almost no original work. So you're not just talking about the lit review, you're talking about the entire.
No, lit review. Let's keep talking about the lit review because that's what this whole thing's about. When we say it's not your original work, is that let's take a look at that aggregator again. Take a look and see if you think the person on the right hand side, the person that wrote that comparative, is that their work? No. No, it's not their work. That's what I mean.
But they didn't hear some praise.
They tried. They changed the word here and there. I'll tell you what, it's a very good question you had. What you need to do is go home and study these, okay? And every one of these that are listed in types of plagiarism have been expanded to this, and my GA, my graduate assistant, did a fantastic job, 2 of them. And your citation down here below, if you go to that citation, you'll get this information. We got some good people in my office. I'm telling you, I am blessed. I learn a lot every day of my work. See, you see why I enjoy my work? I'm being helpful, hopefully, to students, and I learn a lot from my colleagues. Okay, now, how do people get to the point where you think you need to plagiarize? Right off the bat, let me tell you this. Pressure. You waited too long to start your dissertation. You're meeting timelines, deadlines. Oh, we see it all the time. Can you hurry up and review my literature? I got to defend next week. It's not like that. You understand? The pressure. Now, that's why I said a while ago that you're vulnerable at this stage in the literature review. Because if you're trying to if you're bumping up against deadlines, you're going to try to get that review of literature somehow. And you are tempted to do what we call plagiarism. All right? So here's some more statements that I've created. But they're basically the same. They have a common thread. You're under pressure to make progress in the dissertation process. That doesn't mean that you meet deadlines. You need to progress. And so you want to get ahead. And there's nothing wrong with that. But you've got to I am so glad that we had this workshop, because this is a key element of your dissertation. And if you do it well, the rest of it is gonna be a breeze. I promise. Because people like Dr. Katie can help you with methodology. Dr. Tracy and I can help you up to a certain point. See, we even know our limitations. So, you gotta do that. So, but there's always someone around to help you. And God bless us, we've been blessed with Katie. You're attempting to make a good showing to your professors, peers, and family. You understand? And so you want to develop this piece of work to show off that you're somebody. Nothing wrong with that. But let's do it right. Let's do it right for the right reason. You don't want to fall behind others in finishing your dissertation. It's another. You want to meet or beat deadlines. I always said that. You are willing to, listen to this one, you're willing to take a risk or take a chance that your professor will not notice your plagiarized work. That might be a reason for you to, oh, hey, can't you? And mainly because, look at all you people here, 50 some odd people. And if Dr. Tracy and I, and Dr. Katie, are having to read every one of these, and you said, they can't read all of those like that, you know, I'm gonna get by with this. You get my message. Okay.
We may miss it, but turn it in won't.
Yeah. And while we don't make it a practice to do that, I am in contact with the professors or the advisors of our students, and I think they do. You find wording in a passage that fits perfectly with your topic that you're trying to do. It says, Dr. Katie said that, I can't say it any better. You know, so you have a temptation to go. Now, there's nothing wrong with copying, copying is not a good word, using a sentence or two with quotation marks, page numbers, and citation, and so on, if you're trying to make a point of in your topic. Because that's legitimate. But if you do that too many times repetitively, that's when you get in trouble. Because that's what Dr. Henry said. Only 2% of your work, dissertation was your work, is something the other. If you quote everybody else, what good is that? Yes, ma'am.
That makes it very confusing.
Okay.
Saying that we cannot put in our own opinions in our paper, but at the same time, we have to be careful not to put it down.
Yes.
So how do we insert that 10% in? How do we put that in our writing?
No, you don't want just 10%. You need more than that.
Yes.
You need more than that. You know that. Okay, can I help?
Yeah, again, these numbers are off the cuff and they're just simple, but the story I told was quite true. I mean, you know, we have seen lit reviews that were not technically in error. They had done the correct APA citations, but literally 18 of 20 pages are somebody else's words. And that raises a red flag both in our office and at the graduate school, you know. Is there some magic number for how many quotes are too many? Well, that's too many. But no, you know, again, most dissertations in the lit review are going to have some juicy quotes or some summary quotes or whatever. But I would think something in the ballpark of 10 to 20% of quoted material would be, you know, what you're looking for, right? I mean, if you're doing 80, 90% of the people's words, then you've got a problem. But look, what you're doing is you're not providing an opinion about the topic, and you don't want to just quote other people. What you have to do, though, is read that material and then you provide in your own words an integrative summary. a contrast and comparison, okay? Again, there's nothing magical about this. If I were to have you read 3 works of Shakespeare and then ask you the question, can you find any commonalities in how he writes or the themes he covers, right? You're not giving an opinion, you are providing an analysis of this previous literature.
Thank you, Dr. Henry. See, yes, yes.
Something that I try to do is, like, I will read the article and I'll say, boy, that's a great article. And then I put it away, so I'm not looking at it. And I try to write in my own words what I read. And I may get confused. I may have to, because maybe I didn't understand it as well as I thought. But that's the whole purpose. I mean, that shows, if you are having to quote a lot, that's because you don't know what the article said. And you're needing to rely on the author's words because you don't know it well enough. So read it again, put it away, close it, get it out of your hand, and write your own summary of it. And that way you'll know that it's your words. And if they're, like Tracy said, if there's some juicy quote, I mean, it's something that's so spectacular, you have got to have the author's words, fine, put it in there. But otherwise, it'll be in your words. It'll be paraphrased. Yes, ma'am?
I'm sorry, so if I am doing a summary of an article, I don't have to quote it? Or do I just put the reference at the end?
Oh, you still are citing it.
You
cite it,
Yeah,
but
there's
you
a
don't have
difference
to quote
between
it.
citing it, which is giving, say, a parenthetical reference. When we're talking about quote, we mean literally.
Yes,
The
okay.
4th sentence in this paper were these 10 words, and I'm repeating those 10 words.
So I still have to cite it?
You still cite it.
Yes.
You can say, Denson 2012 found that blah, 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 blah. But it's your own words. It's not what Denson said.
Okay.
But if there's something so fabulous, then you can put quotation marks around it, and then you have to cite the page number also.
Now, if I find several things that
They all go
said
together.
the same thing,
Right.
I still.
Yeah, you can say Denson 2012, Plata 2013, Henley 2014,
Found
yeah.
that.
found that blah, blah, blah.
Good question, yes.
So, I read several articles and books, and I want to paraphrase, to make a particular, help, develop a particular concept. But, there were numerous ideas or, say, new ideas that are not so uncommon in that say paragraph that I'm paraphrasing. So when do I cite? I mean, do I cite each one of those new ideas? Do I cite it at the end?
No, I give you another heuristic. This used to be black letter in APA. In the new manual, it's changed a little bit, but it's still a good black letter rule. You never want to cite the same source more than once in a paragraph, okay? And again, in like up through 4th edition, that was just black letter law in APA style. Now it's phrased a little differently. But you should construct the paragraph so that you only need to cite a source one time. And again, that's the kind of thing that I would mark up as a reader if somebody has 3 points and so they do point 1 cite, do point 2 cite, do point 3 cite. I would mark through the 2 citations and say, the following 3 points all came from X, right? And I mean, it's not that hard to rearrange the words in the paragraph so that you only need to cite them once.
Yeah, good point, because that has happened, and that's what we do. Let me go on. The other thing I want to mention here, what do I have, my time?
You've got plenty of time.
Oh, okay. Intentional and unintentional plagiarism. That's, I think, on back on one of those pages. Mine is single page because I did it. Okay, this is the plagiarism and the behind. Intentional versus unintentional. Now, the intentional list there is so obvious that, I mean, you know, I shouldn't even have to list them, but we have to. Because it says, what do you mean by intentional? We'll take a look at the first one. You buy a pre-written essay. Give me a break. That's intentional. You know what you're doing. Getting someone else to write your thesis, dissertation. That's not good academic integrity in my opinion, but that's plagiarism. Intentional plagiarism. And that's, I'd put you in jail for that. But you're gonna hurt my kids. Copying portions of published theses or dissertations for use in your own. And like Dr. Henley said a moment ago, you will find some dissertations that are very well done. And it goes to your topic, and you find a paragraph or something that's, oh man, let's highlight that sucker, and click copy, and go here, say paste. Okay? You don't want to do that. That's intentional plagiarism. And of course, the next one is very similar, copying portions of the journal article. Borrowing a paper with the intention of copying and pasting some of the portions of it into your dissertation. And calling it your own. I mean, hey, look what I did. Look at my words. What are your words? Okay, and we've already talked about that last bullet. Copying some of the words or ideas from a source that makes up the majority of the word. That's what we're talking about in a few minutes ago. Now, let's go to this gray area. And most of the time, what I have noticed is this, it falls in this area. Which means that if you get caught, you say, oh, I thought I was doing the correct thing. And the kind of questions that were being asked leads me to believe that it would fall in this gray area if you did it. You understand? So most of the time, it's in this gray area. You don't know how to cite, you don't know how to quote, and like Dr. Henley said a while ago, you had, and I have seen this. Point number one, citation. Point number two, citation. The same citation that you use on number one, by the way. And then three, same citation, and like you heard him how he fixed it. All right? That's the way you do it. Okay. Enough said about that. Now, the last page. The last page. Why do we now want you to plagiarize, other than the fact that I already mentioned that academic integrity? It also costs you. Two ways. If you are a graduate student, get caught plagiarizing, intentional plagiarism, get booted out. Everything stops. You can no longer finish your dissertation. You no longer are going to be a prestigious person. Do you understand? So that's the cost. The other one is if you already have work, which I think a lot of you are, and you plagiarize, this could get back to your boss. He'll call you in, he, she will call you in, they will call you in, and they'll reprimand you. They'll put a letter of reprimand in your file. They could fire you. They could demote you. That's the consequences of plagiarism. And I know it sounds like it's ugly and I'm trying to scare you. I'm not. I'm just saying be careful, be careful, be careful. And the last thing that it could do is that in some cases there could be legal action, especially if you do copyright infringement. There, you're stealing somebody's stuff that has that little C in the circle. That could cost you money and go to jail time and all that kind of stuff. We don't want to do it. So, take it easy. Don't just study this stuff. do the right thing, listen to your advisors. If you have questions, there's always somebody around that can help you sort things out and help you shape your wording like it should be and so on. But don't rely on your advisor to do it. I mean, yes, Dr.
Could you address, when students use their own previous documents?
Oh, yes, oh, okay. Auto plagiarism, yes. Self-plagiarism. Self-plagiarism. There have been occasions that, I don't know, some of you may be authors already of articles. That's great. But then if you use that work, your previous work, and just cut and paste from it and start something new under your name, that's called self-plagiarism. And that's a no-no either. That's just as bad as if I plagiarized from Dr. Henley to me. Use it and call it my own. But you said, but this was my own. That's still a no-no. I've got several articles. In fact, I'm working on one now. Dr. Henley and I just finished one. And we submitted it, we hadn't heard from it, and now we're starting the second one, and very similar. Now, I could very easily go back to that first one and do a lot of copy and paste. I'm not going to do it. Well, it's so, yeah, what? Can I cite myself? Yes, I can cite myself, but not copy and paste. But you got to be careful about it. You've got to build on my previous work.
There's a couple conceptual things here. One, if you published it once, and then you're substantially auto-plagiarizing yourself, now there's a little fraud involved, right? I mean, because you're presenting the second thing as another new paper, when in fact it's not, right? It's really just another version of your same ideas. But even more important in terms of the publications, most of you don't need to worry about this, it's irrelevant for what you're doing here getting a dissertation, that typically if you publish in a journal article, you no longer are the copyright holder of that work, okay? So now we're moving past just a little bit of fraud into outright theft, because now you've previously published all these ideas and works. When you got it published there, they now own the copyright to it. So you turn around in another journal and take 50% of that verbatim, you've violated that first journal's legal rights, because you're no longer the copyright holder of those ideas, they are. So it is a legitimate issue. While I'm talking, I'm going to say one more thing. One other thing you can do is all of your faculty, I think you do too, but I know all of your faculty have access to Turnitin. That software is available through the library. Run it yourself, okay? You will find that actually an interesting exercise, even if you know you've not plagiarized a word. If you've not plagiarized a word, I'll guarantee you'll find that report still says that 30% of all this has been previously done, okay? Thinking, how is that? Well, I hope your references were cited correctly, so they read just like everybody else has cited that person, right? And again, any quote has already been repeated. But it is an interesting exercise to run it yourself and see what gets highlighted. You'll learn a little something about your own writing by running it through Turnitin.
But sometimes if you run it yourself, and then your professor runs it behind you, then they said that,
yeah, but again, if you're actually reading it, right, you can see this been run twice, but I mean, it'll say that in the report. The report's kind of color-coded, yeah, I just did that the other day with a dissertation and an article, and it found 80% overlap. Well, obviously, right? The article was based on the dissertation. But I mean, you kind of ignore that color, and then you look at the other colors.
I had trouble with a professor where I had run mine through, and she didn't believe I had access, but I teach at my institution.
Yeah, and I think you have access just through our library. But it is an interesting exercise. It is, again, we've mentioned it a time or two. The graduate school will do it. So if you are just unsure, is something I've done here going to be viewed as plagiarism? Boy, I don't want that to happen. You can run it yourself in advance and see what
Dr.
you
Higgins,
want to say.
can I just add, and just as a departmental rule, we actually submit a turn-in report with the dissertation to our department head.
Okay.
And we do it really as a, I guess not so much a dishonesty, but looking I have found it helps you find accidentally dropped references.
Oh,
If you just accidentally drop a reference out, because all that you moving around, we just lose it.
Okay, I know we can go on, and if you have questions, kind of put them in abeyance, or we'll put them aside. Sorry, I didn't mean to hurt you. Dr. Katie is going to introduce a gentleman that you're going to have, you have an honor to hear, because he just recently was one of you. And he can tell you how he did his review. Right? Right? Okay, good.
Do you want to change mic with
I
him
will.
while
I will.
I'm? So maybe a year or so ago, I'm not exactly sure, Dr. Ballinger and Dr. Kim Graham, when did you all do your meeting over there in that room? Was that about a year ago, maybe? Anyway, they had a panel of former students who had graduated come back, and Dr. Stephen Davis was on the panel. Stephen was one of my students in statistics, and so I already knew that he was a great student. But, so we were listening to the panel, and Dr. Henley and I were sitting next to each other, and Dr. Henley doesn't hand out praise like really easily.
Right.
And he has very high standards, and so I was listening and I was thinking, man, what a cool thing he was talking about, and Tracy leans over and says, I'm very impressed, and I thought, hey. So when we knew we were gonna do this session on the lit review, I said, I'm gonna get hold of Stephen and ask him if he will come and talk to you about his process of documenting his lit review, because I think that that's extremely important. It helps you organize, it helps you reference, it helps you do your your reference page at the end, it helps you with citations. So you have a handout called something about documentation of the lit review process. It's stapled together, it's 2 pages stapled. So I will turn it over to Dr. Stephen Davis.
Dr. Stephen Davis.
Good morning, everybody. Glad to be here. I didn't expect so many of y'all, so y'all just bear with me as I get my bearings. And I want to say, first of all, I try to think about what I might tell you, especially since I've already been oversold a little bit. And the first thing I want to tell you is something that has nothing to do with this, because it's the thing that moved me onward to ending up with a doctorate, which is to really have that vision set in your mind right now, wherever you're at, of commencement and of them calling your name. I mean, you don't know what the name of your dissertation is, your topic, or whatever. Because, as I say, my first year working on my dissertation, I kind of wandered through the dissertation desert. And the only thing at times that kept me going was I had this vision of standing on the little platform or box and the hood and my mother crying because she was all my dissertation and saying, I finally did it, Davis has a dissertation. And sometimes I needed that vision to keep me going, especially that first year I was wandering in the dissertation desert. So have your vision, and when you're wandering in the dissertation desert late at night and everybody else is asleep, remember why you're doing it, because it is all worthwhile when you stand there and everybody cries. But talking about the literature review method, I'll just kind of talk straight through what I did, and you can end up seeing it in the handout. And when I was wandering in the dissertation desert, I wasn't doing this per se. I'll tell you where I started as far as topic and as far as process to help you get an idea of how we ended up here. And maybe if you start here, you will not spend as long in your dissertation completed as I did. But I started with simply a question. We sat in interviews to hire teachers for the next school year. I really started to think, how do we hire teachers? What are we looking for? What's the thing? There's 6 candidates that are going to walk through this door today. What is it that's going to make me as an administrator, or us as a panel, if we have teachers on that committee, what's gonna make us hire that teacher? And can we pin that down to an exact science? And then can we link it to, is that really the best thing? Because I think sometimes teachers walk in, maybe they don't have all the polish, but if they're a really good teacher, did I miss them? Because maybe they didn't have all the things that stuck out to me in the 45 minutes, but when you get them in front of a group of kids, they light up because that's what they do, and maybe they don't do interviews. So I started to think, why don't we ask them to teach demonstration lessons? Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. Why don't we interview them in the summer and maybe they can teach 20 minutes? We have about 10, 12 summer school kids that could come in and work with. Or why don't we go visit them where they're currently teaching? Maybe that would be stepping on other people's toes to walk into school. That might steal your teacher, but kind of want to teach for 20 minutes. But maybe if everybody did it, then... So I started wondering this, how do we hire teachers? Literature. What do we use? Do some people use surveys? So then I started getting into, do we have instruments we use? We used to use a survey you may have heard of called the Teacher Insight. And I've heard through the grapevine that, well, people didn't always think that the Teacher Insight scores necessarily correlate to being a good teacher. So there's a whole topic in and of itself. So I kind of kept going on. So I ended up looking at what tools we use to hire teachers. So I thought that was going to be my dissertation. Do we use weighted applications? Do we use demonstration lessons? Do we just do one interview, multiple interviews? Do we have a panel as a just principal? But I ended up that not being a dissertation. It just wasn't there. A very good analogy, I'm sure you probably heard this, given to me by advisors. You know, you start with a wide funnel, and then as you do your literature review, you come down to a point, and there's your topic. I wasn't at my point yet. I was somewhere kind of up here. And so I ended up wandering into the world of kind of psychology and management literature. And I'll tell you how I got there in a second. And I ended up finding something called FIT. And I said, yes, FIT, that's what I'm looking for. Who fits? And there were 3 types of FIT. There's actually another one I wandered upon, but that's a good way. That I wandered upon the literature, which is person-job fit. How well a person fits with the skills needed for the job. How well a person fits with a group, person-group fit, called PG. So how well you fit with your team of other math teachers, or team of other algebra teachers, or team of other accountants. And then there's person-organization fit. How well do you fit within the entire organization as far as your beliefs, as far as anything to be entire organizationally would have been PO fit. And so there was my point, fit. 3 good constructs that I can pull into education. Somebody had dabbled in that in the area of education before, Lou and Johnson, thank goodness for them. And I'll get to Lou and Johnson in a second. But they had kind of dabbled in pulling the psychology and management stuff into education, and I was just going to take it and run with it. There was my survey. There was my topic, so I finally got there. So let's talk about Lou and Johnson. So Lou and Johnson, one of the people that, you know, I was in education research, and then they had this little management component, FIT. They were one of my anchor, that research was one of my anchor pieces for my lit review, because they had kind of taken one step into the arena that I was going to go in. So Lou and Johnson kind of gave me this idea, it really jumped out at me. I was like, I don't want to do surveys anymore, I don't want to do teacher insight anymore, FIT. They had done FIT in the world of education, so I knew I was going to kind of hang my hat on Lou and Johnson on the lit review. So it's important because one of the things I kind of mentioned in here, and that was important to me coming back, is there's people who, you know, Langford Lowe and Wyckoff, Lou and Johnson, Ballou. I know each one of those was kind of one of my anchor authors. Like Ballou had a specialization in, are we hiring the highest quality teachers? So Ballou looked at SAT scores, being tier 1 universities. And so I still know to this day what Ballou did. So when I needed something for my literature review for do we hire effective candidates, I knew I was probably coming to Ballou. Palouse simply, for the most part, I can boil most of Palouse's research down to, he says you need to hire teachers with high SAT scores and who come from Tier 1 universities. So that's, Palouse was in that area. Langford, Logan, Wyckoff talked about teacher effectiveness in urban settings or difficult school districts. They talked about how do we keep teachers, how do we find teachers who are a good fit in an urban setting and keep them there. That's what they did, Langford, Logan, Wyckoff, and so I kind of knew who I was hanging my hat on, and Lewin Johnson, as I already said, kind of wandered into this world of fit in education. So let's talk about the actual process of what I did for the literature. I thought I was going to be really, really wise, and I printed every article, a whole bunch. I put it in a binder with a tab, and then I sat down and I started on page 1 with a highlighter and a pen. And it took forever. And I still have 3 rebinders full of stuff until I finally got smart. So this is getting smart. So after I got smart and after I got close to my phone, what I would do is this. So I'd sit down for work and I would get on the database and I would pull, I have pulled this, which I'll talk about in a minute. I'd pull about 10 to 12, sometimes 10 to 15 articles. So I'd spend the whole first time pulling. And when I saved them, I made sure I would save them as their way they were going to be cited. So there's an example here under the procedure 2. So I'd say it was Kirsten Lane Smith, 1998, hiring new teachers for school districts. I'd save it that way, and that helped me immensely later on down the road because, again, I'm writing my literature. Gosh, you gotta go back to the literature. Gosh, you gotta go back to the So being able to pull them up real quick helped. So then I would go through, and not at a skim, but at a quick pace, I would figure out what's going on in this article. So really the abstract, of course, helps you a whole lot there. And then I'm trying to figure out where is that going to fit with kind of where I'm already working here. And I would drop that article. So as I worked through that article, I would drop it into my table. So you can look at my table here. So I find where I'm gonna drop it in. As soon as I had a good idea what was going on and a good idea if it was even useful at all, it would get dropped. So I drop it in here. And again, kind of the abstract helped me with the summary. But then as I'm reading through this, one thing I really liked that I think was very helpful to me is in my mind I'm kind of writing chapter 2 even as I'm working through this article. And so if there was a quote, that's a really good quote, or a theme that I knew I needed to pull. So it wasn't a quote, but if I would say something like, Blue 1996 found in his research that teachers from Tier 1 universities were highly more likely to be considered exemplary teachers in their school district. So if it was just a paraphrase, but I needed a citation, I'd go ahead and write it. I would go ahead and write the whole thing out, or write the whole quote out, and it would be below this table. So there would be quotes and blocks and paragraphs. So I might just write a paragraph, or if, I've just had 2 articles and I'm making my connection, and I'm putting them in the same paragraph, I'll just write my little paragraphs. I'll write 8, 10 sentences, and I'll have a little piece of my puzzle that I can drop in later. So that became very, very helpful later. Of course, I didn't use every one of those quotes. Of course, I didn't use every one of those paraphrases. But it gave me an idea of what I was looking for, and it was underneath kind of all of this. This left column as far as topic, I originally had it by question. So the very first way I started this is, what instruments do we use to hire teachers? And of course later when what instruments we use to hire teachers wasn't my big question, I had to adjust and modify it, and it became tools we use for screening, selecting teachers. So it stayed the same, but it became a much smaller piece of my literature. It was still in there because my literature review took us, getting that funnel down. So, but instead of being at the end, because I thought tools we would use as screens to let teachers be the ends, now kind of here because I'm coming back down, if that makes sense. So I kind of moved it up and it became less important. When I would read through something, I thought, oh, this hit the nail on the head. Under usefulness, it gets a 5. So as I see my anchors coming into my chapter 2, they're the 4s and the 5s. I know that I'm going to keep coming back to those. That's Baloo, Anchor Low, the people that I still remember now, those are my 5s. If it was just one quote, or I would probably put them in a block of citations, they were probably a 1. You can see I even wrote a note like Cannon Caston. Don't tell Cannon Caston, but it was not a very thorough study of school administrators in North Carolina. It was just kind of, it was just light. So it was nice to have, but I wanted to anchor my dissertation or my lit review around the Cannon Caston study. So articles would just get dropped in there at different times, and then my notes would go below them. The usefulness column was really helpful to me. That's something, once all was said and done at the very end, not all articles carried the same weight with me. So that helped a lot to know where my anchors were. Another thing that was important as I went through the article and as I kind of did my first run through, not a skim, but a run through, and dropped some things in, was I had a find list. So as you read through an article and there were different things that as they were citing people, I would just put, find Kirsten 1992 because it was cited on page 2 and I knew it was in the references, but I didn't want to flip to the references all the time, so I just find the author 92. I want to go get that one. That's going to be my next one. So I had a little find list. It was just scribbles, but it was a find list, and that would be my next 10 to 15 articles that I was going to do. So my find list was very important because it didn't stop me down, but it gave me a place to go. And of course, that's how I ended up at person, job, person, group, person, organization, fit as it came out of my find list. And so, because I remember I wandered into psychology and management, was because I had a find list and I wanted to do psychology and management. I found my niche. So the find list was very important to me. And then, of course, when I got to the end of the article, I would write the citation so I knew what I was looking for. So my find list became more complete when I got to the end of the article, and I could just write it. So that was very helpful to me, the find list. So my find list, or my look for list, became my next go around. So, if you pull 10 to 15 and you go through them in a night, that's a good night's work. Or a good 2 nights work, or 3 nights work, or whatever. But then my find list became where I started for the next round. And I save things on my computers, on flash drives, in that kind of way sometimes. So sometimes I would even in the beginning call it round 1. Because I would think, if I read that article 4 months ago, it's probably in round 1. And round 2, round 3, round 4. And so one of the things that I found was kind of funny, it didn't start out this way. But round 1, of course, had you pull lots of articles, then round 2 you pull less and less and less and less. As soon as your find list whittles down, or your look for list, and as soon as you're pulling 4 or 5 at a time, probably pretty close. Because you probably got lots of quotes, you probably have less areas to go in the literature, and your focus questions have kind of cleared up a little bit. And you may really be thinking when you go to bed at night, fit, that's it. Or whatever your thing is, you'll go, that's it, okay, I'm there. That's it. This is the gap. I found the gap. I keep looking and there's nothing there, so I'm the gap. Let's see. Oh, this was good as well, or I thought it was good. Of course, I'm a biased thing, but those conversations with your professor, the emails back and forth, or the little things. When I met with my professor, I said, you're going to have to forgive me, but I'm going to keep my laptop and I'm going to type as we go. And those went just kind of down at the bottom. So You know, if I'm opening up things, I might scroll down there and try to remember, you know, have I hit all the things? I had 2 advisors. When it's all said and done, have I hit all the things they wanted me to hit? You know, is there anything else from this conversation? Because what happens is you get so much information overload between your own thoughts, between what's in the literature, and between what your advisor's telling you. You need to make sure you don't forget anything, and writing it down was helpful for me. So my little notes at the end there from my advisor were very, very helpful. I want to go back. You know, I've got the table there, and then I've got the quotes and the blocks that I put in there. As I dropped a quote in, as I sat down and said, it's time to write chapter 2, really. And as I put these pieces of puzzles into chapter 2, I would highlight it so I know it's been used. That was kind of important too. So I highlighted it and done. And that helps. You know, again, the ability to sit in a night and write, but drop in 2 or 3 kind of big 8 to 10 sentence blocks, it was really nice. It really, you know, it really helps. So that was really good. In the addition to talking to your professor, if you see somebody who ends up as an expert in this area, email them. I emailed a couple professors. One had a non-published article, I believe, and it was cited somewhere, and I said, "You sent it to me." I said, "I love what you've done." I think she was in the area of just person job fit or something like that. I'm like, "I want to use you. Can you send me these 2 things, these 1 thing?" She was from Arizona State. She said, "I'd love to." So, you know, I was just there, and I had a wild hair, and I thought, let's just email her and see if she responds. And she wanted me to send her my thing, and I was done. We had a little higher ed moment there. It was just great. So anyway, it was kind of fun. So just if you see somebody who is really in your line of thought there, email them and, you know, say, "Hey, I'm working on whatever." You know, send them your survey instrument. My survey instrument was very, it's not something I can send them, but send them your instrument. Of course, if you're going to use their instrument, make sure you get permission and all that. I made my own. But just email them. That's something that could be fun. I think I've hit everything kind of on here.
Do you all have any questions you want to ask Stephen? Yes.
When you reference your notes, if you go back to that table, can you unpack it a little bit and how did you organize that? What did that look like?
Well, it kind of grew. It started with just my questions. So it really started with something like, what makes an effective teacher? So there's a whole area of effective teacher research. How do we hire teachers? And really, that's probably the only 2 questions I had to begin with. So I would have had 2 little tables. And then, as I started to get into like tools, and tools for hiring, there are surveys, there are psychological tests, there are weighted applications, there are demonstration lessons, which is a more teaching thing. So as tools for screening became its own thing, it got its own topic. And then, of course, eventually, when I fell upon fit became its own topic. And then, when I fell on person group, person job, person organization fit, 1, 2, 3. So then I got 3. And then instead of becoming a question, it became a topic. Because I didn't have a question about it anymore. I knew there was now an area of research that solely dealt with how does a person fit with the job, and I knew I needed to exhaust that research. So I got everything that exhausted that research and went to that specific table. So it's really about questions that I had. You know, again, I started with sitting around a table going, how does everybody else hire teachers? To eventually topics and current streams of research in higher ed. So that's kind of how they developed. So it grew, I guess. It grew and separated, if that makes sense. Does that help out?
It does, but I'm wondering, your notes that are attached to your references, I mean, it's more than just the summary, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so with regards to organization and how you're able to quickly find that as you evolve, was that also in a spreadsheet template? How did that fit or integrate with this?
Imagine just all the way after.
Okay.
And keep it the same. You could, now if you wanted to, you could draw a line right here between prior research statements and human resource theory. Just break it off and put all these quotes here. You very easily could. I didn't. I had all my tables up here, all my quotes down here, and all my notes from my professor underneath. But you can very easily, and I'm out of track random, so I'm not even that organized. So you can very easily just put a line here, break it off, and in between your tables have your blocks and puzzle pieces.
The question about your usefulness, when you look at a source, like for example, the first one here was about Ralph, the usefulness, what method did you use to determine where to rank it on the scale? Did you develop a rubric within this rubric? How did you?
It's all in my brain, and it's all 1 through 5. I can tell you a 1 for me was I'm probably going to use it one time.
Okay.
I'm probably going to use 1 quote or 1 citation. So they may be the last one to the party about a stream of research, and so they just got this one little piece, but I'll put their name in there because they are in part. The 4s and the 5s were my anchors. So Lou and Johnson, who were the ones that pulled fit and education and teachers together, there's no question they were a 5. Because Lou and Johnson were the only people who done what I was even trying to do, which is bring this psychological management concept in the world of public education, K-12, together. So they were a 5 for sure. And yeah, and then kind of everybody in between. So a 3 would be exactly what you were thinking. It was not my best, not my worst. I mean, I probably had 4 or 5 5s, 4 or 5 1s, and then I'm probably in the middle.
So it was based on your need versus the information was reliable.
Yes.
That's
Yes, it's based on my need and how much of my chapter 2 they were going to take up. Yes.
For those of us who are Excel chart channels, can you either share a link or give us one we borrow your chart?
I would be glad to. Can you just send this out in the email form to everybody?
Yeah.
And this was a Word chart.
That's a Word chart.
This was Word because you have the spell check, you have the cell grows and all that. So this was Word. But yes, I have no issue with this getting sent out. Yes.
What did you use to judge the teachers, like student test scores and things like that, and the exam marks? That's the first question. And the second question is, what type of study was it? Did you start one way and then switch to another, or was it mixed, or what?
Okay, good question. The teacher effectiveness and student, I did not make anything. The literature, most of the literature judging teacher effectiveness links it to student test scores as an outcome. So it's either a pre-test, post-test situation where they actually did a real research study, or they were trying to compare teacher characteristics to state assessments. So they're always looking for test scores as far as student outcomes. And in any teacher effectiveness research I found was linking characteristics such as years of experience, having a master's degree, graduating from a tier 1 university, I'm trying to remember what else, but they're trying to, I call it the holy grail of teacher effectiveness. Can you find these things and they automatically link to student outcomes? And there's no holy grail when it comes. Yeah. The only one they found was tier 1 university and all the research I found. Years of experience gives you a bump like in the beginning, especially in like 3rd through 5th grade reading. but it kind of balanced out, so they didn't even call that a strong link between years of experience and like reading scores in elementary. But all of those studies, that's what they're trying to do. I forgot the second question now.
Did you start, for example, was it originally a mixed study and then you
Yes.
took it down?
Yes, thank you. It started as quantitative. It ended up as mixed method. It ended up as mixed methods because I added, at the recommendation of my advisor, I think 3 open-ended questions at the end. And thank the Lord in heaven I did. Mixed method saved my life. So I'm a believer. Put a couple questions at the end because I mean, yeah, you've got to do now qualitative, analysis, but the themes came out and it was very, very interesting, especially because my study as far as the actual survey was just a little off the wall as far as trying to get K through 12 world in this psychological pieces to fit. But mixed methods, it saved me.
I'm sorry, you triggered another question. When you developed your own tool, your own instrument, did you have to get that approved?
Yes, I had to get that approved at my proposal. But I didn't have to ask anybody for permission to use it, so that's nice. But yes, I had to get that approved. And, I'll tell you the mistake I made. I think I talked about this at the last seminar. I bit up to more than I could chew with my sample selection. There are 13 demographic characteristics of school districts in the state of Texas. I wanted 2 from each. I wanted a stratified sample, so I wanted 2 from each group. Except I wanted 1 urban school district because there's only, I believe, 11, maybe 8, I forget. But the urban school districts are so large, they would have overwhelmed my entire study, so I could only do 1. That's Dallas, Fort Worth, El Paso, Houston. I think Garland would actually be in there too, I'm not sure. But there's those 13 different they're demographic characteristics, and they're not all just by size, but it's mainly by size. And I'm like, I want 2 from each one, and then I want 1 urban school district. Well, trying to get people at Dallas to pay attention to little old me. So, Dallas, I'd send them a letter and I have to wait. And then I called them, I had to wait. And I'm like, okay, Dallas is off the list. And Fort Worth, send them a letter and wait. Call them and wait. Oh my goodness, I'm never going to find an urban school district, and my proposal's already been approved. So thank you, El Paso. Oh, I can't say that, can I?
Yes, you can.
Thank you, El Paso. I
lived there for one.
I don't think they can be saying they were wonderful and awesome. But I just got, my eyes got too big for my stomach with that one, so I would just be, that process of sending the letters, then following up a week later with a call, and if they say no, I've got to go back to the drawing board and find, until I have 2 in every category out of 12, and then 1 from the 13. It was a great design, but I had a very good sample, very balanced across the state of Texas, but I wouldn't recommend something like that unless you're a full-time researcher. Yes.
Approximately how many records did you end up with?
Oh, goodness. That's a good question. I don't want to lie either.
Then the word approximately.
I hate to say it's just a wide range, but I want to say 150 to 200.
Can you say it again a little louder?
150 to 200. But there's some ones in there. There were some ones. There were some people who just, I love them. I need the ones, but there was just one.
What's your opinion about things such as ref works or endnotes? Because I use endnotes so that when I go in and I have various subtopics that I'm looking for references. So I go out and say I'm looking for something on high stakes testing. I go out, I find all the articles that I want and put it into endnotes, and then I can come back to that. Is that something you use?
I know some people who have very high opinions of that. by the time I got to where I was, I did not want to learn anything else but Microsoft Word. And that's fine. I know people who said that that was a huge time saver for them. I would have to go for them. It was awesome. For me, I guess in little ways I was too much of a control freak, but I just wanted to save it as the citation. Oh, and I should have mentioned in here, I tried to write this exactly so I could drop it in too. So you can see I hope I did it right. Don't judge if I didn't, but I tried to put this so I could drop it right to my reference list. So that's my little version of notes. I know some people swear by this one.
And the reason why, actually the librarians at Commerce would love to show you how to do endnotes. So if you want to do that, they have a whole procedure to teach you how to do that. And Megan actually wanted to come and teach you about endnotes, but we already had everything pretty well organized. This is a good way to do it if you just want to, just offering those of you who don't like to get into all those kinds of things, ways to do it. I think that we're going to have to stop. So thank you very much, Stephen. It's great to hear from someone who was in the trenches more than we're old, so it's good to hear from someone currently.
My study?
Yeah.
It should be published. You should be able to find it in all the journals.
I gave you information about his dissertation at the bottom, so if you want to read it, you can find it on ProQuest. I did.
If anybody wants to, I will send you anything. I do not hoard. I will be glad to send you my dissertation. You can be the second person to read it. And anything else, any other questions you have, feel free to answer them at any time. I don't mind at all. Thank you.